Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sagan National Colloquium. I'm Matt Volrath, a professor in the Business Administration program here at Ohio Wesleyan, and it's my pleasure to introduce and welcome tonight Jared Yarnall-Schane. Jared is the Entrepreneurship Director at the Biomimicry Institute, and you'll learn more about biomimicry in Jared's talk, but for now, I'll just say that the Biomimicry Institute empowers people to create nature-inspired solutions for a healthy planet. Jared brings his entrepreneurial background and startup coaching experience to the Biomimicry Institute, where he supports entrepreneurs as they commercialize biomedic innovations that are addressing major climate and environmental issues. Before joining the Institute, Jared developed and ran startup training programs with Penn State University's incubator and accelerator programs, and was the program director of Thought for Food, a global community of food and agriculture entrepreneurs. He's the creator of the open source startup training toolkit, Startup Guts, was an initial founding member of the ag tech company Green Towers, and started a small food preservation company in rural Kenya. He has an executive certificate in social impact strategy from the University of Pennsylvania and a BS in mechanical engineering from Penn State University. Jared, thanks so much for making time to be with us tonight. We're really excited to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Matt, for inviting me. And I'm really looking forward to sharing biomimicry and some really inspiring work that is happening in the world. I hope that you leave this talk inspired and hopeful for our future. And I just wanted to note before I get going, I'm actually based in Bloomington, Indiana, and I was raised in rural Pennsylvania. So haven't spent much time in Ohio, but I have a great love for our temperate forest that's all around us. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen here, and we'll dive in. All right. So first and foremost, can anyone tell me what this is a picture of? So go ahead, pop it in the chat. What do you think this is on the screen? We won't judge anyone's answers. Let's see. Ooh. Michaela, you're pretty close. With feathers. What kind of feathers are they? They are feathers. Yeah, you got it, Michaela. They're peacock feathers. So here is our peacock. Beautiful, beautiful animal. Here's a close-up of their feathers. And I love to show this example for a couple of reasons. One is just, wow, what an amazing, beautiful animal. And wow, what an incredible kind of image when we're able to look at that close up. But I share it because peacock feathers are actually pigmented brown. The vivid blue and green that we're seeing is a phenomenon known as structural color. So what that means is that those scales, they're peacock feathers, they have kind of like scales on them on the micron and nanoscale level. They reflect back certain wavelengths of light. So that vivid blue, that vivid green, it's reflecting back those wavelengths of light in this phenomenon known as structural color. And this is found throughout the natural world. So I saw someone else mention butterflies. We see structural color oftentimes on the wings of butterflies. This is a morpho butterfly. If you've ever seen those iridescent blue butterflies, it's a similar phenomenon. And this leads me to biomimicry. Biomimicry is a practice that learns from and mimics biological strategies that have evolved over the 3.8 billion years that life has existed on our planet. And so we learn from that, and then we figure out, well, how might we be able to apply that to our human-built environment? So with this peacock, how might we learn from that structural coloring on the peacock or butterfly, and then think, well, how could we make color in that same way? And that's exactly what the company Cypress Materials is doing. So I'm going to show this video here. Let me know if you have problems viewing it or hearing it. So let's learn about Cypress Materials.
These beautifully vivid blue wings belong to the blue morpho butterfly, but take a closer look and you'll see that they're actually translucent. There's no blue pigmentation involved. Instead, the wing has millions of stacked nanostructures which reflect blue light and allow other wavelengths of light to pass through. This phenomenon is called structural color, And this is where the physical geometry of a material determines its optical properties. And it's possible that this wing could hold the secret to keeping our cities cool. Scientists have been trying to learn from the light-bending abilities of butterfly wings for some time. But fabricating materials with these tiny nanostructures has traditionally been a delicate and expensive process, which is why Cypress Materials is developing a simple way to paint them onto surfaces. These optical coatings are made from synthetic polymers that are designed to self-assemble into ordered structures. It's a bit like spaghetti that straightens itself out, but on the nanoscale. These nanostructures can be designed to reflect specific wavelengths of light, just like the butterfly wing. Why is this a neat idea? Well, it provides an environmentally friendly way of producing colour, replacing the need for toxic pigments or dyes, and can be used in anything from nail polish to cars. You could also paint a heat-reflective coating onto a building using nanostructures that reflect infrared light. In warmer climates, this would massively reduce the demand for air conditioning, providing a more sustainable method to keeping us cool. All with the help of our butterfly's wings.
Great. It's an incredible technology. It's an incredible solution that we're able to create color in the same way that butterflies do, that peacocks do, with this structural coloration. And for a long time, for most of kind of human history, our color has been made by pigments. Sometimes that's harvested naturally, but more often than not, that's been mined. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I wanted just to show here Cypress Materials in action. So what you're going to see is they just apply it via a spray gun. And over the course of just a small amount of time, it self-assembles to reflect back a specific wavelength of light, in this case, blue. Just really incredible stuff. They're based in California and doing some incredible work. So cool, that's neat, that's exciting. We might start to see some business potential here. And in the video, they talked about some of the climate and environmental benefit of this and the fact that it can reflect infrared wavelengths and help keep buildings cool. But we want to dig in a little bit more. And this is why, for me, I get really excited about this. So this is a titanium mine in northern Canada. And that white powder is called titanium dioxide. Now, titanium dioxide is just something I learned about recently, but it's something that I can almost guarantee that 100% of you have in the room around you. It's a white pigment, and it's used in everything from paint to traffic lines on the road, to toothpaste, to even the powdered sugar on donuts, those white powdered donuts. And it's titanium. It's made out of metal. It's mined like any other metal would be. This is pretty ubiquitous. It's out of all the pigments that are used, titanium dioxide, it's 2/3 of all of those pigments. And Bloomberg recently put out a report that the titanium dioxide market is expected to reach $22 billion by the year 2026. 22 billion. So we can see, like, that's the economic case for why these mining operations are in existence. And this is probably a nicer picture of a mine than some that I could have pulled. So biomimicry, okay, here's a problem. Let's stop mining. Let's stop extracting resources. Well, how does nature produce white? And there's this really fascinating beetle found in arid deserts, I think the Saharan desert in particular, called the Siphoculus beetle. And you can see it has these white scales, this white structure on it. And in order to get white wavelengths, you have to completely diffuse and then reflect that light. Titanium dioxide does a really good job at that, and this beetle does a really good job at that without using any metal. When scientists do a close-up in image B here, they found these kind of really structured scales that take in light, diffuse it, and then reflect it back. And it's beneficial to this insect because it needs to stay cool in the hot desert. Well, these researchers at the University of Cambridge were like, well, can we mimic that? Can we replicate that shape and create white pigments that can replace titanium dioxide. And that's what you see here in image D, the man-made synthetic version. And the best part is that this is made out of cellulose, which is the most abundant compound on the planet. So instead of having to mine for precious metals, now we can use agricultural residue, agricultural waste to create this white pigment. So that leads me to my first point and the first takeaway that I hope you all have from this talk, and that's that biomimicry can mitigate or even eliminate extractive industries. And when we say extractive industries, we mean things that are non-renewable, things like gas, oil, minerals. We also think of extraction, though, as extracting water from our water table, especially in areas that can't be easily replenished. And this is what biomimicry is. So emulate, now that you see that example of structural color, that starts to become intuitive. You think about how you might be able to mimic or replicate other patterns or forms or structures found in the natural world. But biomimicry is more than just emulation. Biomimicry is this sustainability ethos. And what that means is we need to start to create our human-built environment to closer reflect what happens in the natural world. In nature, so let's think about springtime right now. All of these leaves and flowers are emerging. And they're using nutrients from dead leaves, from dead plant and animal matter to be able to sustain their growth and help them grow. Nature works in what we call a circular economy. It uses resources, then breaks them down into basic building blocks, and then uses it again. Nature runs on sunlight. The sun powers our planet by photosynthesis. And humans currently, we run on ancient sunlight. We have to drill down or mine down deep into the earth to harness that energy. So when we talk about biomimicry, what we're talking about is how can you create designs, systems, products, economies even, that fit within that ethos. And the last part is one of my favorites, and it's this whole idea of reconnection. Now, I like you might be like me. I had no idea what titanium dioxide was until a month or so ago, a few months ago, as I was doing research on a startup. But now I'm hyper aware that this compound, that this metal is in the walls around me. It's in the table that my computer's sitting on. It's in the paper that we use. Biomimicry allows us to have daily moments where we're able to reflect and say, wow, that color it's structural, just like a peacock feather. You start to have an appreciation for nature that I think some people inherently have, but a lot of people don't. And that's one of the things that we do at the Biomimicry Institute that I'm really proud of. So to sum it all up, biomimicry acts as a bridge between biology and design. And our goal at the Institute is to bring biomimicry mainstream. We believe that by learning from nature, so not just learning about nature, but really learning from nature, we can create a world that is better for all species, including humans. So my work at the Institute, I support startups, I support new technologies and new companies that are getting started. We help them get funding, introductions to customers, things like that. We also have two other branches. We have an education branch at the Institute where we help bring biomimicry into formal and informal classrooms. We provide tools and curriculum and training for teachers. And then we also run the website Ask Nature. So if you go to asknature.org, and I'll go through a little bit about Ask Nature here in 20 minutes or so. That's our effort around science communication. There's a lot of really, really good things happening in the world. And oftentimes we don't know about it because it's not being accurately communicated or clearly communicated. So part of our goal at the Institute is to help rectify that. All right, I'm going to move into the second point that I hope you take away from this talk, and then we'll share another example. And that's that by learning from and working with nature, we can create a healthier and more resilient world. We can regenerate our planet. and I was going to put together a couple slides about this company called eConcrete, but I thought that this video can explain it way better than I can. So let's take a look at this company, eConcrete, that's based out of Tel Aviv.
If you take a look at concrete structures like breakwaters or seawalls, the water around them is often clear. That's not actually a good thing, because it means there's no life. Marine species are actually most abundant in coastal areas, but it's also where us humans prefer to live too. So when we build here, we drive away marine life.
The concrete in the marine world has a lot of additives, a lot of chemicals, and some of those materials are actually leaching out, and they're actually prohibiting marine life to thrive. If we keep developing without any regards to natural communities, there is a tilting point from which beyond we cannot really go back.
In the coastal city of Tel Aviv, an Israeli startup wants to revolutionize our urban coastlines. Their sea defenses are transforming lifeless man-made structures into teeming ecosystems. They do this by replacing standard concrete with their own special cement formulas.
As opposed to regular cement-based concrete, eConcrete includes certain elements that enhance the growth of marine flora and fauna of plants and animals. Our admix, which is kind of our secret sauce, is basically kind of sealing the concrete, making it less aggressive for the marine environment. That once we add it, we enable life to flourish.
In the lab, the team run tests to identify what mixes will work best for marine life.
So we take really ice cube sized concrete slabs of different compositions, and we put larvae, 20, 30, 50. We need to have a lot of replicates. We're geeky scientists, so we have to have a lot of replication and controls. And then within a few days or just a few weeks, we can get an answer on their preference. So obviously if they die, they have a very low tolerance to that specific concrete mix design. And if they thrive or they flourish, we can quantify that very quickly.
eConcrete says it typically sees double the biodiversity of regular grey concrete. From fish and sea caterpillars on their armour blocks to crabs on these tidal pools that sit on the shoreline.
This unit holds water during the low tide, so it's always moist, and therefore it has a very comfortable habitat for crabs and sea anemones and sea stars, etc. These pools have been here for less than 3 months, and this is already what you can see. It's covered with life. See the rock around it, which has been here for probably 10, 20, maybe even more years, only has a thin layer of green algae, and that's it.
As well as the composition of the cement mix, eConcrete designs its products specifically to the marine environment it will be deployed, to create niches for endangered species, or to develop nurseries like these oyster beds. The final part of the equation is creating complex surface textures to mimic natural rock or coral, an environment that helps anchor young organisms.
When concrete elements are being cast, the typical goal is to have a very slick surface, very, very smooth. The idea is to get the water to flow right across it. When we're designing eConcrete with a rough surface, we want to do the complete opposite. We want to slow the water when they are crossing the structure so that the larvae can actually adhere and attach to the surface.
eConcrete has to offer its clients more than just ecological credentials. Over time, they've discovered that creating hospitable habitats for marine life adds another advantage, one that is surely hard to ignore.
We've seen evidence to the fact that the growth of the organisms on the concrete create kind of a layer of defense. Just the addition of weight, we can actually gain stability and strength over time.
This is let's say the unit when we put it in the water. And this is after a year in the water. And what you can see here is all the oysters are completely covering it. We designed the units so they can withstand the forces and perform in terms of structural performance, but they can also be a backbone for ecological enhancement.
The company tests its miniature designs in tanks full of real seawater, rocks, plants and animal life from around the world.
What we're looking for is the accumulation of calcium carbonate on the surface of the concrete of different mixes and different designs. This is the process that we call biogenic buildup. So with time, we get a buildup of calcium carbonate that is sourced from marine organisms on the surface of the concrete. And we actually encapsulate the concrete with a natural rock. So when the organism die, in case of a coral, it will die and then another coral will sit on it, and that's how a reef is growing.
The hope that our man-made structures could become stronger over time also means better economics. The units require less maintenance and could therefore stay in the water for longer. E-concrete, though, is just a few years old, so it needs more time to really quantify the longevity of its products. But the company are certain their products are better for the environment, and not just in terms of improving biodiversity.
We're kind of trying to offset some of that immense carbon footprint of the concrete industry.
Construction is responsible for about 11% of global carbon emissions. By adding a biological crust to their products, e-concrete prevents some CO2 from being released into the atmosphere.
For every kilogram of calcium carbonate being created by those marine organisms, we're offsetting 120 grams of CO2. So think about building a port infrastructure or a city waterfront that is an active carbon sink. I think that's a great advantage of the technology.
Oops. So eConcrete, they're an incredible company. One of our programs that we run, it's called the Ray of Hope Prize, and they were our 2020 Ray of Hope Prize winner. And just to recap some aspects of their solution, they have a unique concrete composition that is life-friendly. Instead of killing life, it attracts and sustains life. They work at the micro level with some micro surface textures that allow for polyps and other small organisms to attach and to start to grow. And then they design at the macro level to have their setups fit in with the existing natural ecosystems. One thing they didn't mention in this video is how many people live on the coast. So the UN says that there's about 2.8 billion people, 2.8 billion people that live within 60 miles of a coast. And that's 40% of all humans. And more people just keep going to the coast to live. So as that happens, as sea level rise continues to happen, as we have more and more extreme weather events, we're going to need more ways to protect our coastline. And I think e-concrete solution shows us that it doesn't have to be human protection at all costs. We can help we can help our cities and communities, while at the same time helping and supporting the native ecosystems that already exist and thrive there. So let's recap a little bit. We know that biomimicry can lessen or even eliminate extractive industries. We know that biomimicry can regenerate degraded ecosystems. So now I'm going to talk about 3 more areas that biomimicry, I think that there's a really compelling case to bring biomimicry to practice this practice of looking to nature for design solutions. And that's that biomimicry is not industry specific. It's found throughout industry and across industry. Biomimicry is oftentimes a platform technology or can lead to platform technologies. And biomimicry is truly a $1 trillion market opportunity, not only helping our planet, but there's real business value and business potential here. So let's cover the first one. So biomimicry is not industry specific. And we see this, if you start listing off industries, I could probably give examples from nearly any industry. There's some icons there that represent some that we're seeing. I would say that there's maybe 5 or 6 industries that we see biomimicry being very commonplace now. So first, pharmaceuticals, medical industries. There's a lot of advancement there in biomimicry because we're starting to learn more about how our body works. I mean, even think about the vaccine. What we're learning for COVID is how much learning went into spike proteins and the crown and how we can block that receptor, we're learning about how things in nature work and replicating that, emulating that, bringing that to market. We also see biomimicry frequently in textiles and fashion, garments, plants and animals. They have beautiful surface texture that achieve everything from waterproofing to keeping animals warm. And there's a lot we can learn about how we can maybe synthesize or grow our own textiles so that we can start replicating some of that. And this image here, it's from Wearable, and they find color that exists in the natural world that is exhibited via a protein, and then they grow textile fibers with that embedded protein. And it's not just limited to color. They could also do it with other properties such as stretch or waterproofing. Another industry that we see biomimicry commonplace is in sanitation and waste, especially in areas that don't have a sewage infrastructure, sewage grid. If you go hiking in the woods, you don't see piles of poop or pee everywhere. Nature is really good at breaking that down and recycling those nutrients. So how might we learn from those natural processes, or even sometimes implement those natural processes into our existing sewage infrastructure? And another area we see biomimicry quite frequently is in agriculture and farming, specifically around protecting crops from pests and fungus and things like that. And I actually have an example of that I'll show in a little bit. So, I'm going to pause here. Does anyone have any industries that they're really curious about? I might not cover them right now, but I do have some examples prepared that we can do at the end of the presentation. So if you have any industries you're curious about, please put them in the chat. Cool. And let me just pull that up here. Textile, yeah, I can share a little bit more about textile, Luke. Ooh, food access, that's a good one, Michaela. Organizational biomimicry too. Yeah, let's talk about some of these at the end of the presentation. These are all really good questions. All right, so let's talk about the second point, about how biomimicry can lead to platform technologies. And I'll start by just defining platform technologies. It's a group of technologies that are used as a base or infrastructure upon which other applications, technologies, or processes are developed. That's what we mean when we say platform technologies. A classic example would be a computer. You have all the hardware components, and then it's a platform for other software and other processes to run on top of that. But in biomimicry, we oftentimes see things take place in the physical world, in the hardware world. And here's an example that I think illustrates this beautifully. So this creature is the Manta Shrimp, a really special and incredible creature. I encourage you all to Google it after the presentation. But one of the amazing things about the Manta Shrimp is that it punches its prey with its club at a speed that's faster than a .22 caliber bullet. And it punches things like mollusks that have an extremely hard shell, and it can punch that over and over again to break it open and get its food. So scientists were fascinated by this, and they were wondering, well, why does this club not break? It can do this over and over again without any damage. And what they found was this helical kind of pattern, this helical architecture inside the club, which you can see here. That's what image B is. And what they found is that this is actually one of the most, if not the most, efficient way to dissipate energy. And we know it's one of the most efficient ways because of convergent evolution. There's at least 60 other species that have developed the same pattern to dissipate energy. And it's because of how the structure kind of overlaps that energy can flow through without causing any damage. So the company Helicoid Industries saw this, and they had this fantastic idea about, well, how might we be able to bring this into industries where we need to dissipate stress and stressors or impacts. And in particular, they're focusing on composite industries, carbon fiber, for example. And because it's the most efficient way to dissipate energy, you're able to use much less material. So the team at Helicoid theorizes, and they're testing this out now, but they theorize that they can effectively double the length of a wind turbine blade because they can reduce the amount of weight that's necessary to keep those blades structurally sound. And for those of you that are energy geeks, you might know that if you can double the length of a wind turbine blade, that quadruples energy output. So we can make an already efficient renewable energy even more efficient and even more economically viable. Same thing on an airplane. Much of an airplane's architecture is composite, carbon fiber. If we can eliminate weight on the airplane, we have a tremendous amount of fuel savings, which again is an economic savings as well as an environmental savings. This is an incredible example of a company that's bringing this to life, doing this technology and bringing it to life. And then the last point was that biomimicry is a $1 trillion industry. And it's not just me saying this. I'm a huge advocate for biomimicry, of course, but there's some pretty smart people out there. So Andreessen Horowitz, who's one of the top venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, wrote a manifesto 2 years ago, and they said that bio today is where information technology, computer technology, programming was 50 years ago. It's on the precipice of touching all of our lives. And just this year, the Boston Consulting Group wrote a report with a group called Hello Tomorrow, and they estimate that what they call nature co-design will affect more than $30 trillion of economic activity over the next 30 years, which is the equivalent of 40% of current global GDP. And then you can see World Economic Forum, similar, $10 trillion, create 395 million jobs by the year 2030. So there's a world of business opportunity, as well as a world of opportunity to design our world in a way that's harmonious with nature. I do just want to note a lot of these analyses are including synthetic biology or industrial biotechnology into their calculations. And oftentimes we see biomimicry and synthetic biology go hand in hand, although that's not always the case. So we recognize biomimicry is just a piece of this pie, but we still think that it's an incredibly large piece. So just to recap, these are, again, the takeaways that I hope you leave with, and I hope that keep you very excited. We know that biomimicry can lessen or eliminate extractive industries. Biomimicry can regenerate degraded ecosystems. It's not industry specific. It can lead to platform technologies, and it really is a $1 trillion market opportunity. So let's switch gears just a little bit. I talked a lot about some really cool examples about biomimicry as a whole, but I want to show you how you can start to bring this into your work, no matter if you're an engineer or a designer or an artist or a business person or someone working at a nonprofit. There's a lot of ways that you can bring biomimicry into your work. And in particular, this is important to me. So I have an engineering degree from Penn State. I had to take one biology class in my time there, and I could not tell you what I learned. I forget it all. I really don't know. But now, by working at the Biomimicry Institute, I'm starting to see how this is relevant to engineers. And I'll give you an example. Bones. Let's think about human bones or bird bones. They're incredibly complex. They can self-heal. They are optimized to provide strength and flexibility, and optimized to use the least amount of materials possible. There's actually algorithms that researchers are studying that inform kind of how bones grow. Now, as an engineer, my mind's immediately going to thinking about how might I redesign structures knowing this? Can I apply that same bone algorithm into creating new bridges, new cars, new buildings? That's one of the powers of biomimicry. It helps enable this whole new design inspiration lens that is oftentimes more efficient and is better for the planet. And it can be really intimidating to know where to start if you're not a biologist, if you don't know the natural world so well. So we have this website, Ask Nature, that we've created. And if you want to follow along, you can go to asknature.org. There's so many great resources there. But it's a science communication platform. It's an online magazine, and it's a tool to help you learn about nature. It contains close to about 2,000 of what we call biological strategies, things that have evolved over the course of billions of years. We have real life examples of biomimicry, so you can learn more about any of the solutions I've shown, or learn about even more solutions that are out there. And then there's also tools for educators and students, so you can learn about how to bring biomimicry into your work and into your classroom. So I'm going to share an example of how you can use Ask Nature, because I think that's helpful. So if you click into biological strategies, you're going to see this beautiful page of a whole bunch of images, and you can start to see like, oh, wow, proteins provide freeze tolerance. Remember how we spray, remember when we used to be able to travel and they'd have to defrost airplanes? Well, what if we could use benign chemicals and materials to do that, materials that are easy to synthesize and are good for the environment? So within biological strategies, there's a couple ways you can find what you're looking for. You can search for something like waterproof, and it will show how plants and animals keep themselves dry. But there's a tool over here on the left that I really want to point out and highlight. And we call this our functional taxonomy. And what that means is this is going to help you as someone with a problem figure out the right questions to ask. So let's say you're a student who is interested in possibly exploring a career, or maybe even starting a company helping farmers. And in particular, you've noticed that the farmers around you are struggling with fungal infections. Their crops get are getting attacked by fungi and spoiling, and they can never make it to the grocery store shelf. Over here, what we can do is we can say, well, I want to protect something from physical harm. I want to protect from a living threat, and that living threat is fungi. And then what appears is a list of strategies that we've collected, and most often they're strategies based in deep academic research that we can then further learn about and explore how we can apply nature-inspired solutions to solve this challenge. So in particular, let's look at this. Chemicals in oregano act as a fungicide. We can click in, we give a short synopsis. We oftentimes share videos, pictures, and then we link off to other resources so you can learn more. It's a really powerful tool. I encourage you all to explore this and think about how you might be able to bring this into your design process, no matter what field you're in. And actually, I have an example I want to show about how oregano can be used as a fungicide. So this is my last video, one of our last examples to share here. So enjoy.
Right until you sink your teeth into them, fresh fruit and vegetables are at risk from fungal infection. And this is a big nuisance to fruit producers who lose around 25% of fruit to fungi spoilage each year. That's even after the use of synthetic fungicides, which are the go-to solution for this problem. But the use of these chemicals is problematic. They have negative effects on both the health of humans and the environment, adversely impact honeybee pollination, and are easily washed away from plants. And because many have a single mode of action, fungi can mutate and develop resistance to them over time. But many plants have evolved their own natural defenses. For example, plants like oregano produce compounds which have antifungal properties. These can be extracted easily and used as natural fungicides. However, their use is limited because they break down quickly within the environment. To overcome this, the company Nanomic has collected a range of these compounds and encapsulated them in tiny biological containers. This protects the compounds from being broken down. and helps them to attach to plants. If the fruits are attacked by fungi, the pH of the plant's surface becomes more acidic, and this causes the capsules to break open and release their contents, which quickly kills the fungi. The best bit is that Nanomix plant-powered products have been demonstrated to be more effective than synthetic fungicides. And because they're derived from plants, they're safe for humans and the environment, keeping your fruit fresh and tasty for longer.
One of the things I love about Nanomic, we didn't get into it in that video, but it was the inventors of the technology. They are from Turkey, and their grandparents and great-grandparents told them that they used to preserve food by dipping it in oregano oil, and that this was a practice that their family has done for centuries. We recognize at the Biomimicry Institute that this is not a new field. Since the dawn of human civilization, we've been learning from nature. And there's a lot of indigenous wisdom and knowledge that we can gain and learn as we work through this. I think Nanomic is just such an incredible example. With my food and agriculture background, yeah, it just is really inspiring for me. So the last tool that I'd like to share, I think is very relevant for anyone in college or even those that are maybe young professionals. And it's the Biomimicry Toolbox. Now, this was created a few years ago. It is a little bit dated, but there's some really great activities and resources for you there to learn more about biomimicry and learn more about some of the principles I've talked about here, such as that ethos of biomimicry and that reconnection. So if you go to toolbox.biomimicry.org, that's where you can learn and explore more on that site. So to wrap it up, I want to leave you with this question. What would our Earth look like if we redesigned our human world to fit in with nature? What would our planet look like? I like to believe we'd have cleaner land, cleaner oceans, cleaner cities, cleaner farms, cleaner air. I also like to think that we'd have a more equitable distribution of resources because it wouldn't be so extractive where only those with the most money can partake. I really believe that we need everyone to adopt this mindset of learning from nature, not just about nature, and that this will be a key to addressing climate change and some of these environmental challenges that we're facing. And I'm not alone. Steve Jobs, we all know Steve Jobs. He said to his biographer that he thinks that the biggest innovations of the 21st century will be the intersection of biology and technology. A new era is beginning. So thank you. I hope that you learned a lot during this presentation. There's how you can reach me, how you can find the Biomimicry Institute. And Matt, do we have some time for some questions?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Jared. This was a really exciting and inspiring talk. So if anybody does have questions, please put them in the chat. I think we've already got several requests for examples about specific industries. And while people are thinking of other things they might want to ask about, I wanted to ask you, you've mentioned a couple of times that you sense that biomimicry is kind of on the cusp of becoming a really big thing. What do you think has held it back so far? Why isn't this a mainstream approach to thinking and business and design?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, Matt. It's something that we've actually been talking about quite a lot at the Biomimicry Institute lately. I think I'd like to start by saying, for most of human history, I think that we've applied this way of thinking. And maybe it was out of necessity. It definitely wasn't called biomimicry, but humans have learned by watching other plants and animals and ecosystems how to interact with our environment. I mean, even think about Da Vinci, one of our greatest inventors of all time, and folks like Galileo. It was all around studying and observing the natural world and creating designs that mimicked that and replicated that. I really think it's just been in the past 200, maybe 300 years or so that we've started to become an extractive species. So mining things like coal and oil, our monoculture of things like cotton, corn. So yeah, I think that's kind of the historical context. And I think then what's allowing a renaissance, so to speak, is that we now have the technologies and tools available to understand at a deep level what's happening. We're able to zoom in and see at a nanoscale or micron scale the surface phenomena of a butterfly. We're able to find diatoms and see diatoms in the ocean, which are these really incredible and beautiful creatures that have a glass kind of shell and chlorophyll inside. And we're able to understand how that organism comes to be and start to think about how we might be able to learn from that and create some designs. So yeah, I think the technologies and tools have enabled this. And yeah, I mean, another big tool is CRISPR-Cas9, if you know synthetic biology, the ability to be able to manipulate DNA. And we certainly don't think that's a huge piece of biomimicry, but it certainly is a piece of biomimicry and something that we're exploring as we go forward. So.
Great, thanks. Okay, we're getting quite a few questions in the chat, and there were the industry examples from earlier in the talk. So I'm going to start with a few that might be more broadly relevant, and then we'll go back and we'll address as many as we can. So I wanted to start with a question from Michaela. She said, is there an example of organizational biomimicry, which I think is interesting because it's kind of taking things in a different direction than what you've been talking about with your other examples?
Yeah, certainly. So yes, there are. There's, that's not necessarily my background as much. There's a great researcher and professor, Dr. Tamsin Woolley-Barker, who wrote a book called Teaming, and it was exploring how beetles and honeybees make collective decisions, and there's some really interesting insight into how to do that, and even how to bring that possibly into some computer coding. And it all revolves that there's some autonomy, but there are very simple and rigid rules that these bees and ants follow. I think we also, leading up to the election, New York Times published an article about how animals elect leaders. And that was a really fascinating article to explore as well, because hierarchy is something that we witness and see in the natural world. And we think it's important to study that, not only for humans and our close relatives, but there's things that we can learn from other animal species as well. So yeah, I don't have any example queued up on my PowerPoint to share, but those would be two places I'd recommend you to look.
Okay, so I'm going to go down to our last question, which was a very broad one, and I think a lot of people could relate to. Ethan asks, what's the best action possible I can incorporate in my life as an individual to better the planet?
That is a great question, Ethan. Such a good question. I think for me personally, I think one of the biggest lessons that I've learned, so I grew up at a summer camp in the Poconos, which is a mountain range in Pennsylvania, and just from an early age had ample access to nature and the outdoors. And through working with now companies and startups through this process, I really believe that one of the best things we can do is provide access for individuals to experience nature and wilderness. Before COVID shut everything down, we led a trip to Panama with a group of young potential entrepreneurs. They were just getting started. And it was incredible to go from Panama City, which is a really dense urban environment, into agricultural land, into degraded land that was this mismatch of farming and forest, to then the primary rainforest, the rainforest that hadn't been destroyed. And just seeing our participants go through that journey was eye-opening. It made us realize the impact that humans are having on our planet, and it really helped set the tone for, as future leaders, you're all future leaders, you have a responsibility for the products and systems and designs that you create. or for the organizations that you're a part of and the teams that you support. And I think for me personally, being able to help facilitate that experience in nature is one of the most important things.
Okay, we've got a couple of people who have asked, how does the Institute partner with companies like the ones you showed? And if somebody has an idea, how do they begin to work with the Biomimicry Institute?
Yeah. So if you have an idea, this year we are running a program called the Biomimicry Global Design Challenge. And through that process, you can either work on your idea and bring biomimicry into it, come up with a whole new biomimicry idea to solve a challenge. So that's a global opportunity. We then select the top design submissions, and we work with them in a program that we call the Biomimicry Launch Pad, which is all around helping individuals with an idea explore how they might bring that to life. So at this point, you're not organized as a company, you're just an individual or a team with an idea. That would be one of the best ways. For then these examples I showed, we run the Ray of Hope Prize, and this is for companies that are a bit more established. Typically, they have secured maybe about $1 million to $3 million in funding, and maybe that's from research grants, maybe that's from investment, maybe that's through some other sources. And typically those companies and teams already have a proof of concept. They already have proven that their technology works, and they're starting to scale with some, or they're starting to grow with some pilots and early adopter customers. So that's the two kind of startup lens. We also primarily just provide free curriculum and materials for educators and teachers, and you can find most of that at asknature.org. And we're exploring some deeper industry relationships, starting with the fashion and textile industry, around how we might bring this thinking into that industry as a whole. So those are the ways that we work with other groups.
Great. Okay, we have a question from Luke, and Luke wonders if you have any thoughts about fractals and their use outside of graphic design and 3D modeling.
Yeah, well, fractals are pretty damn cool. And I think just like that helical architecture I showed you with helicoid, there's a reason why so many plants and animals and things kind of come back to that golden ratio or whatever fractals. I forget the Fibonacci sequence. And it's because it's efficient. So we see that spiral that is on a shell, like a nautilus shell, that's found throughout the natural world. And it's because it's one of the most efficient ways to grow. So as we think about 3D printing, we can learn from how fractals and things arrange themselves. We know that that's one of the most efficient ways that organisms grow. So can we actually create manufacturing processes that follow that? Again, with my background, that's what comes to mind. I know that there's other applications, but yeah, when we see convergent evolution, that's a signal that we should be on the lookout for a bigger pattern that's happening, and it's probably more efficient.
All right, so we still have time for a few questions. So if anybody else has something they'd like to add to the chat, please put it in. In the meantime, let's go back to the industry examples that you solicited during your talk. And two, we had one from Luke and one from Michelle asking about an example from the textile industry and one related to food access. Do you have any thoughts that come to mind for one or both of those?
Yeah, I'm actually going to share my screen again here to show you textiles. So something we don't think about as a huge contributor to climate change, but textiles, it's ginormous. 60% of textiles are synthetic, which means they're made out of oil. It's kind of crazy that we can drill oil and then create a dress or a shirt from that oil, but that's what's happening. And the textile industry actually is one of the leading causes of wastewater pollution. 20% of wastewater is caused through the treatment and dyeing process of textiles. Just massive, massive issues. So I mentioned this company Wearable before. And I'll dive a little bit deeper into this example, but this company, they were fascinated by the Discosoma Coral, which is this beautifully vivid coral here. And in particular, they've realized that this coral had this brilliant color. It was created by a protein fiber. So this team, they were a team of students at the Pratt Institute of Fashion and Technology, combined with a researcher who specializes on bio-based materials. They figured out a way that they could actually grow textile fibers with this protein built in. This is an example of some early kind of bench prototypes. They've since been able to do a lot more work, and they actually won the H&M Global Change competition last year all around this technology. Yeah, it's a fantastic example. I don't have a slide for this one, but another example of a company that we're starting to work with, actually two more examples. It's called Renaissance Fibers, and they're actually growing hemp. Hemp is one of the best kind of bio-based materials out there, flax being another bio-based material. And hemp was used for centuries as a premier textile fabric. The issue is that when cotton came along and the cotton industry started to boom, that just became so much more efficient. So what this team at Renaissance Fibers has done is they watched how hemp degraded in natural ecosystems and in places that have black water. So that's typically like coastal areas where a river meets the coast. And what they found was that this process of getting really salty water and then having clean water broke apart the fibers in such a way that was extremely affordable. It was benign for the environment. No chemicals had to be used, and efficient. So they're scaling up operations. They're called Renaissance Fibers, and they're bringing to market just some, really fantastic technology. And last one, just briefly, there's a company called Spintex Engineering. They came out of Oxford, and they are successfully mimicking a spider spinneret so that we can actually pool a textile fiber from a liquid gel at room temperature, no harsh chemicals, and they're able to create a textile fiber from that. Now that still costs quite a bit. It's going to be for really high-end applications to start, but yeah, when we think about the best kind of weavers in the world, we think about spiders, and they're doing it. Spintex has found a way to recreate that.
Jared, thank you so much. This has been a really great talk, and thanks for the questions, everyone. We appreciate it. I hope everyone takes the time to go and play around on that asknature.org site. What a great resource, a great place to encounter some new ideas and try to solve some problems and just get excited yourself. So Jared, thanks again. Thanks everyone for joining us. Our next talk is April 22nd with Billy Vickers. We hope to see you then. Have a good night, everyone.